The perfect family. The Harrison family seemed like a portrait of the American dream. Dr. Richard Harrison, a renowned cardiologist, and his wife Catherine, a sophisticated gallery owner, had built their lives on discipline, elegance, and an unspoken expectation of perfection. Their home, a grand colonial tucked away in the serene suburbs of Connecticut, exuded warmth and prosperity. Ornate gardens, a sparkling pool, ornaments from Catherine's travels, and laughter that seemed to drift from every window. Richard, tall and dignified, carried an aura of authority. He was reserved, but undeniably kind, respected not only in the hospital where he saved lives, but also among neighbors who admired the Harrison family as model citizens. Catherine orchestrated every aspect of the household with gentle precision. Her taste was flawless, her parties legendary. She instilled in her daughters the importance of grace, dignity, and the subtle power of social connections. Emily, the eldest, was a reflection of her parents' achievements and hopes. She was strikingly attractive, glossy chestnut hair, eyes sharp with intelligence and concealed ambition. Emily excelled at everything she did. Class valedictorian, debate champion, president of the local youth philanthropy club. Wherever she went, admiration followed, but so did a certain restlessness, an incessant need to be the very best, to never feel small or overlooked. At family gatherings, her laughter was the loudest, her smile the brightest. But beneath the perfectly applied lipstick hid an edge that only those closest to her ever sensed. Sarah, the younger of the two sisters, embodied softness and sincerity. Petite, with wide green eyes and an easy smile, her presence brought a sense of calm to the bustling home. Unlike Emily, Sarah favored quiet moments. Reading under the oak tree at dawn, tending to the small wildflowers behind the kitchen, helping her mother at the gallery, or volunteering at the animal shelter. She was gentle to a fault, always the first to apologize, the last to raise her voice. Her innocence and openness endeared her to teachers, friends, and even the family's old golden retriever, Max. On the surface, the relationship between Emily and Sarah sparkled with sisterly affection. Emily, the confident guide. Sarah, the eager supporter. Catherine often watched them fondly, relieved that despite their differences, her daughters seemed to bond easily. Sarah glowing with admiration, Emily dispensing tips on everything from public speaking to the proper way to organize a closet. Yet, within the walls of the Harrison home, subtle fractures started to appear. Minute but persistent lines of jealousy, pride, and misunderstanding. Sarah's innate kindness sometimes cast Emily's more calculated charm into sharp relief. Richard's quiet but evident favoring of Sarah's empathy over Emily's ambition planted invisible seeds of resentment. There were occasional moments, quick glances, sharp comments masked as jokes, Emily's frown when Sarah received unexpected praise from their father. These moments passed quickly, forgotten by all but the sisters themselves. The house itself was both refuge and stage, filled with light and shadows. Every room bore traces of their lives. Emily's framed debate trophies on the mantelpiece, Sarah's pastel drawings on the fridge, Catherine's favorite art books stacked beside the fireplace, Richard's jazz records playing softly in the evenings. Sunday mornings were sacred, family brunches where conversation sparkled, and plans for the week were neatly arranged over pancakes and orange juice. No one outside the family could have guessed that behind this facade of order and happiness, something fragile was shifting. The Harrisons were, for all intents and purposes, perfect. But perfection, fragile as stained glass, can shatter with the lightest touch. As the sun set on another idyllic day, no one in the house knew that the web connecting each of them would soon be tested. A test that would reveal, with sharp clarity, just what the word family truly meant. The sudden calamity. It began as an ordinary Thursday, the sort that passed almost unnoticed in the Harrison household. The sun rose lazily over the manicured lawn, Birds darted between the climbing roses, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the kitchen. Sarah finished feeding Max and wandered into the study to gather her sketches for the upcoming neighborhood art show. Catherine was upstairs, sorting jewelry into velvet-lined drawers, one of her morning rituals, when suddenly, her voice echoed down the hall, sharp and panicked. "Richard! Girls! Come here, please, quickly!" Within seconds, the entire family gathered in Catherine's bedroom. Her hands were trembling, her face pale as she stared at the open jewelry chest on her vanity. The antique diamond necklace, the one she treasured above all else, was missing. The necklace wasn't just valuable. It was heirloom, passed down through generations of Catherine's family. She wore it every anniversary, every milestone event. Panic flared in her chest. Richard moved to her side, trying to calm her, but Catherine's distress quickly became the center of everyone's attention. Emily was first to break the silence. "Are you sure you didn't move it, Mom? Maybe you took it out for cleaning?" Her tone, though concerned, had a subtle edge, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Sarah, who rarely entered her mother's room without permission, felt a cold wave of apprehension. "I haven't seen it, Mom." "Not for weeks. Maybe it fell behind the dresser?" Within minutes, the whole upstairs buzzed with urgent energy. Drawers were emptied. The dresser and nightstands were moved. Richard checked the safe. Catherine scanned her closet. As each possible hiding place turned up empty, unease intensified. Then Catherine stopped. Her eyes narrowed, staring at Sarah with a confusion that bordered on suspicion. "Sarah, you were in here yesterday afternoon, weren't you? Didn't you say you needed some thread from my sewing kit?" Sarah's face flushed in confusion. "Yes, but I only took the thread and left." "I never touched anything else." Emily lingered by the door, arms crossed. "It's just strange." "Nothing else is missing. Just the diamond necklace." Her words dangled in the air, heavy, leading. That afternoon, the housekeeper, Mrs. Murphy, discovered something odd while tidying up the guest bathroom, an empty velvet jewelry pouch tucked hastily behind the sink. Catherine recognized the pouch at once, her heartbreak now intertwined with suspicion. A tense family meeting followed in the living room. Catherine laid out the necklace's disappearance and the found pouch. Her gaze, uncertain and wounded, flicked between her daughters. Richard stayed silent, unsure what to think, his trust in his family at war with the mounting evidence. Emily spoke up once more. "Look, I don't want to accuse anyone, but Sarah was the last one in Mom's room, and now the pouch turns up in the guest bathroom. It's too much of a coincidence." The implication was clear, slicing through what little trust remained. Sarah's protests fell on deaf ears, her stammered explanations, her pleas, all lost in the thickening cloud of suspicion. By nightfall, the Harrisons felt the tremor of crisis deep in their bones. The home that once felt safe and unbreakable now echoed with doubt and betrayal. None of them slept well, the image of the missing necklace looming larger with each passing hour, the first undeniable crack in their perfect facade. And in the shadows, resentment and confusion began to ferment, setting the stage for the reckoning to come. Cast out. The next morning dawned cold and gray, as if the weather itself mourned the loss of harmony in the Harrison household. Sarah lay in bed, her mind replaying every moment of the previous day. The humiliation of being accused, the way her mother's voice had trembled with disappointment, and, worst of all, the deadened silence from her father and the sharp gaze of her sister, all haunted her. Downstairs, the atmosphere was tense. Instead of the usual comforting scent of cinnamon rolls, there was only the faint aroma of cold, untouched coffee. No one spoke as Sarah descended the stairs, clutching the railing as if steadying herself against a storm. Richard stared quietly at the table. Catherine's eyes were rimmed red from crying, and Emily busied herself with her phone, a small frown creasing her brow. Sarah sat, heart pounding, hoping for some word of comfort or reassurance. Instead, Catherine cleared her throat, voice fragile but determined. "Sarah, we've thought about what happened, and the circumstances. They just don't add up. The evidence is overwhelming." Sarah's lips trembled. "I swear, Mom, I would never do something like this. I would never take your necklace. Please, you have to believe me." But Richard remained silent, his knuckles white against his coffee mug. Emily finally looked up, her eyes cool and unreadable. "If you didn't do it, then who did?" No one else was in that room. A few hours later, it was decided. The conversation was brief, final, and excruciating. Catherine explained, in the calmest tone she could muster, that Sarah would have to leave the house, at least until she could figure things out. She would be allowed to take her belongings, and Catherine pressed a bank envelope with a few $100s into her hands, insisting it was just to help her get started. It was meant as a kindness, but to Sarah it felt like a declaration of exile. Packing was agony. Sarah moved through her bedroom, the space filled with memories of laughter, secrets, and late-night talks with Emily, trying to choose which parts of her life to take and which to leave behind. She glanced at the bookshelf lined with childhood novels, the corkboard covered in Polaroids, the faded soccer medals. She packed quietly, save for the occasional sniffle when she stumbled upon an old sketchbook from a happier time. Emily appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You should hurry up." "Mom doesn't want this to drag on." Sarah looked up, searching her sister's face for some sign of regret or sympathy, but found only a mask of indifference. "I didn't do this, Emily," she whispered, voice raw. Emily's lips pressed to a thin line. "You always wanted things to be fair, Sarah. But life isn't fair." "You'll learn that the hard way, I guess." Later that afternoon, Sarah stood at the front door with 2 suitcases and an aching heart. Catherine hugged her stiffly, whispering, "I love you, Sarah, but I have to protect my family." Richard managed nothing more than a nod and averted eyes. Emily lingered at the top of the stairs, silent. As the taxi pulled away from the grand house and into the unfamiliar streets, Sarah couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face. She watched the world she had always known fade from view, the ache in her chest sharpening into something colder, something that, deep down, would later become resolve. Nightfall found her alone in a small, unfamiliar motel room. She stared at the ceiling, letting the pain settle into her bones. Despair threatened to swallow her, but beneath it flickered a stubborn ember of defiance. She promised herself, through clenched teeth and unshed tears, that she would survive. She would become someone stronger, someone who would never again be powerless in the hands of those who claimed to love her most. And somewhere, in that cold little room, the first seed of her future transformation was planted. Sarah would never let anyone else decide her fate again. Metamorphosis. For Sarah Harrison, her world shrank to the 4 faded walls of a cheap motel room. Bleak fluorescent lighting flickered overhead. Outside, distant highway traffic hummed a melancholy lullaby. For the first time in her life, her phone contacts offered no comfort. Her old friends were, at best, the distant acquaintances of a world that was now closed to her, thanks to rumor and the poisonous stain of her supposed betrayal. The bank envelope Catherine pressed into her palm, 3 crisp hundreds, barely lasted the week, spent on nights with a leaky faucet and bland vending machine dinners. Panic and sorrow threatened to engulf her. Yet as the days stretched on, numbness gave way to something else. A survivor's pragmatism, a steel-edged voice that whispered to get up, move forward, don't ever beg again. Sarah searched desperately for work. At first, the rejections came swift and sharp. No references, no solid address, no trustworthiness. Hotels and sleek boutiques in town glanced at her resume, then looked away. The local diner, with its faded linoleum and smell of burnt coffee, finally said yes. She became Sarah H., just a face among other faces. Each morning, before dawn, she tied her hair back, donned a borrowed uniform, and joined the small army of cooks and waitresses who served eggs and stories to town regulars. There was kindness here. In Darlene, the tough, tattooed manager who scolded her for working through her break and quietly extended her shifts so she would make rent. In Tom, the elderly dishwasher with hands scrubbed raw from 8 decades of labor, who always saved her the biggest muffin from the tray. The pay was little, but Sarah learned to stretch every dollar. She watched and listened, picking up lessons in toughness and resourcefulness from people the Harrisons would have passed by without a glance. At night, she dragged herself back to her tiny studio and read the same battered library book 4 times in a row, poetry scribbled onto napkins, anything to fill the silence. Some nights, the memories, the look on Emily's face, her mother's trembling hands, cut straight through her armor. She would bury her head in her pillow, weep with the fury and loneliness of abandonment, then let sleep come, restless and thin. Yet beneath the pain, something grew, a quiet, hungry force. Sarah realized she would never win her family back by begging for their belief. Their world judged by appearances and rumors. Hers had been rewritten by a sister's betrayal. She had to transform herself, become the architect of her own story, not the ghost of someone else's lie. Sarah's transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. On her days off, she enrolled in night classes at the local community college. Balancing omelet orders and textbook chapters, she rediscovered a sharpness, a quick, analytical mind her family had never quite noticed. Overshadowed, as she always was, by Emily's dazzling success. She aced her classes, earning the trust of professors, piecing together the beginnings of a new future. The anonymity of being no one was, in a strange way, liberating. She tried on new versions of herself, different hairstyles, thrift store jackets, the confidence that came from surviving alone. Her world, once small and pampered, expanded in unpredictable directions. She made friends in places she never would have entered before. The cramped art studio above the hardware store, where she spent hours painting and talking to other lost souls. The animal shelter, where she volunteered on weekends. Even the late-night bus home, where women like Mrs. Lee, a Korean immigrant who always fell asleep on Sarah's shoulder, taught her, quietly, about pain and persistence. Years passed. The scrawny, shattered girl who left the Harrison mansion grew into a woman of quiet magnetism. Sarah took on a new name, Sierra, to finally sever the last thread of her old life. Her studies in business and marketing paid off. Community college credits turned into a scholarship to a respected state university. There, she worked double, managing a cafe by day and classes by night, gaining skills, confidence, and ambition she never imagined she possessed. Eventually, Sierra caught the attention of a tech startup founder during a campus networking event. Her story, abridged, sanitized of the trauma, impressed him enough to offer an internship. Determined not to let the opportunity slip by, Sierra threw herself into her work, drafting proposals, picking up coding basics from friendly developers, volunteering for every hard task no one else wanted. She grew used to presenting ideas before boardrooms, fighting for her projects, and earning respect. Respect not rooted in a family name, but in hard-won skill. Personal change followed professional growth. She no longer sought validation in the kind words of authority figures. The self-doubt, once a constant whisperer in her mind, faded with every successful project, every piece of public recognition. Sarah, now Sierra, mastered the art of masking her vulnerability. A deliberate smile in meetings, eyes unblinking in the face of patronizing senior partners, composure that could pass for steely coldness. Still, in quiet moments, Sierra's thoughts turned homeward. Not with longing, but with a clear-eyed assessment of the people who hurt her. She read articles in local news about her father's new medical awards, social columns praising Emily's charitable work. Her mother continued to host lavish fundraisers, the perfect hostess in perfectly tailored dresses. But Sierra saw through it now. The brittle pride, the obsession with image, the fault lines that she once blamed herself for. She made a list, a real one, in a battered moleskin notebook, of every injustice, every humiliation, every way Emily had twisted the truth to erase her. Each bullet point was a vow. She would return, not for forgiveness, but for reckoning. This would not be a reckless crusade. Sierra built her life for this, a web of connections, resources, strategic allies in the city's business world. She researched legal angles, gathered old contacts who had witnessed fragments of the truth, tracked social media and financial records, collecting every bit of evidence that might one day expose her sister. But revenge was not the only thing driving her forward. If anything, Sierra realized, the hunger for justice was as much about reclaiming her own dignity as it was about punishing Emily. She wanted to confront her past with her head high, to show her family and the world that she was not the frail, helpless girl who had been so easily cast aside. By her 25th birthday, Sierra owned a small but thriving marketing consultancy, employed half a dozen people, and had earned a local reputation for her tenacity and grit. No longer did she hang back in the shadows. She cultivated a reputation for blunt honesty and loyalty to her team. Her face graced local business magazines, and invitations to the same kinds of high society events where her family moved now arrived addressed to Miss Sierra Holt. The final piece fell into place when Sierra, dressed in an artfully tailored suit, attended a charity gala as a corporate sponsor. She moved easily through the glittering crowd, no longer intimidated by the trappings of wealth or imposter syndrome. On the far side of the room, she spotted Emily, radiant in a floor-length gown, holding court among city dignitaries. Their eyes met briefly, but Emily looked past her, not recognizing the woman she'd once called her little sister. Sierra smiled to herself. Her transformation was complete. She had evolved from an outcast into a woman of power and presence, with both the means and the will to shape her fate. The time for shadows was over. The next phase of her plan, returning to the family that had once betrayed her and exposing the truth, was about to begin. And this time, Sierra would not be the one to break. The return. The plan begins. Sierra Holt, once Sarah Harrison, merged seamlessly into the city's social and business circles. Her transformation, so painstakingly cultivated, was her greatest asset. No one in the Garden District or the row of sparkling downtown banks looked at her and saw the ruined girl once cast from her home. They saw only the savvy consultant, the sharp dresser, the woman who never seemed out of place. Her return to her hometown came with little fanfare but careful calculation. She leased a bright, modern apartment overlooking the cityscape, a statement of arrival but never of extravagance. From the glass balcony, she could almost see the edges of the neighborhood where her old childhood home and her old life were painstakingly preserved, untouched, at least on the surface, by the damage wrought years earlier. Within weeks, her firm took on its most ambitious campaign yet, collaborating with a philanthropic foundation on a series of high-profile charity galas, one of which she knew was chaired by Catherine, her own mother. The roster of supporters and sponsors was heavy with familiar names from her childhood: doctors, bankers, society columnists. The same families that had once whispered about the Harrison scandal behind closed doors. Emily Harrison was, of course, among the faces splashed across the event schedules, lauded as a social impact leader and marketing director for a healthcare nonprofit. The first time Sierra entered the Harrison Foundation's marble-floored office building, memories flitted like ghosts. She moved with calm assurance, exchanging business cards, shaking hands. It took little effort to keep up her carefully crafted persona. Smile just enough, listen more than speak, never reveal more than others wish to see. The very walls radiated the kind of wealth and reputational sting she remembered from her youth. But she steeled herself, refusing to be intimidated. She was here for a purpose. The plan unfolded in layers, each more subtle than the last. Sierra leveraged meetings, accidental encounters, and volunteer sign-ups to place herself within the gravity field of her former family. At a reception, she introduced herself to Catherine Harrison as the new consultant heading up digital media strategy. Her mother, elegant as ever, shook her hand with polite indifference. No flicker of recognition, not even a stray glimmer of unease. Sierra's heart beat like a drum beneath her tailored blazer, but she showed nothing. Emily, however, was a different story. Their first meeting happened in early spring, at a networking breakfast just before the main fundraising drive. Sierra arrived deliberately late, scanning the room to find her elder sister at the center of a knot of philanthropists, laughter ringing like crystal. When their paths finally crossed, Emily greeted her with cool professionalism, a practiced handshake, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "I heard you're leading media for the Harrison Initiative." "We're grateful to have you," Emily said, studying Sierra with faint curiosity. There was no trace of recognition. "Pleasure's mine," Sierra replied. "I've heard a lot about you, Emily." "Everyone says the Foundation's work speaks for itself." Emily's eyes narrowed. "We try." In those brief seconds, Sierra studied her sister. The polished exterior, the confidence curling just short of arrogance. Underneath, Sierra noticed something new. A wary intensity, humor edged with vigilance. Emily's ascent, it seemed, had come at a price. Sierra's strategy was never about brash confrontations or impulsive revenge. This was a game of patience, precision, and psychological pressure. She networked with the city's elite, booking FaceTime with bankers, writing opinion columns praising local philanthropy. Her charm was never forced. Genuine empathy for the overlooked, strategic compliments for those with egos. Soon, she was a recognized fixture at ribbon cuttings, cocktail fundraisers, and panel discussions. Behind the facade, she gathered information. Sierra paid close attention to the vulnerabilities of those she'd once called family. She noted the subtle cracks. Catherine's increasing forgetfulness and anxiety over the Foundation's dwindling donors. Richard's absence from public events, replaced by carefully worded press releases about long hospital shifts. Emily's own campaign for a major grant was plagued by delays and whispers about mismanaged accounting. Sierra cultivated relationships with hidden intent. She befriended a gentle but overlooked accountant at the Harrison Foundation who confessed worries about missing documentation. She struck up friendly conversations with journalists covering the city's social scene. There were strategic phone calls and coffee invitations, each designed to gather seemingly innocuous details. Who controlled which budgets, who gossiped after board meetings, who resented Emily's quick rise. She kept an electronic dossier, secure and encrypted, on her personal laptop. Financial flows, traces of favoritism, board decisions, donor complaints, staff turnovers. The patterns were familiar and, in some ways, damning. It became clear that Emily's by-the-book persona concealed small injustices and questionable choices, cut corners, berated employees, a willingness to throw others under the bus. While there was nothing criminal yet, Sierra saw the same manipulative gears turning that had destroyed her own life. Through all of this, Sierra played many roles: compassionate mentor, witty conversationalist, neutral observer. When Emily's stress grew to the surface, Sierra was there, quietly offering advice or orchestrating situations where Emily would overreact or lose her composure in public. Wordless doubts began to ripple across committee members and donors. It was never about sabotaging the Foundation's mission or ending Emily's career in one scandalous blow. Instead, Sierra laid out traps: a speech where Emily misquoted figures from an old report, a board meeting where a crucial document went missing, later resurfacing thanks to Sierra's interjection, a gala seating plan that stranded Emily next to two feuding politicians. Each incident was minor by itself, but together, they knit a growing fabric of tension and distrust around her sister. Perhaps the most delicate maneuver was at the spring gala, where Sierra arranged for an old family acquaintance, someone who had quietly doubted Sarah's guilt years before, to sit beside Catherine. Over the clink of glassware and the glow of fairy lights, this guest brought up memories of the past. "Do you ever wonder what became of your youngest daughter? She had such a gentle soul. It was such a tragedy, all those rumors." For a moment, Catherine's veneer cracked. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her brooch, her eyes searching the room as if Sarah might flicker out of the crowd. Emily, seated across the table, looked away, color draining from her cheeks. After the gala, rumors picked up speed. Several staffers noted Emily's increasing agitation: frantic calls, harsh reprimands, late-night emails. The board president, an old friend of Richard's, approached Sierra privately. "You seem to have a calming effect on Emily. She seemed off lately. Anything we should be worried about?" Sierra smiled, polite as ever. "Not at all. These events can be stressful. Rest assured, I'm here to support your family in any way I can." Yet the feeling of power, carefully controlled, pulsed through her veins. This was not bitterness, nor cheap payback. It was the deliberate unfurling of truth, a test to see if the cracks would finally let in the light. At home, Sierra gazed out across the city skyline, her reflection blurred against the glass. The plan was only just beginning. She told herself there would be time for compassion and time for confrontation. But first, she needed Emily, Catherine, and Richard to see the limits of their own certainty. Only then, she believed, would true justice be possible. And somewhere deep inside, Sierra wondered, when the final moment of reckoning came, if any of them would truly recognize the woman she had become. Cracks in the walls. It didn't happen all at once. From a distance, the Harrisons and their foundation maintained the same composed exterior as always. Matching designer suits, annual reports printed on thick cream paper. Catherine's flawless posture at every event. But beneath the surface, tensions spread like frost on a window, unseen until it was too late to save the glass from cracking. Emily, for so long the assured center of the family's social engine, began to feel the world tilting beneath her feet. In the first few weeks after the gala, she tried to ignore it, attributing restless sleep to overwork, blaming her frayed nerves on endless emails and budget meetings. Yet the ripples only widened. She found herself bristling more easily during meetings, snapping at junior staff for minor mistakes, losing her usual fluency when donors asked pointed questions. One morning, she was summoned by the foundation's board chair, a kindly but no-nonsense woman who had praised Emily's work for years. "There are concerns about your grant progress," she said quietly, concern etched into her brow. "You're juggling a lot. Is everything all right?" Emily pasted on her practiced smile, but inside, panic plucked at her heart. She remembered every one of Sarah's childhood tears, every vulnerable moment she'd ever mocked, and for the briefest instant wondered if regret was what made her chest ache. She left the meeting shaken, staring at her trembling hands, wondering when she had started feeling afraid. Catherine, too, seemed changed. Once, her voice had filled rooms with easy confidence. Now, it quavered at the edge of each sentence, especially when board members or old friends asked about the family. She had begun to forget small details, calendar appointments, the names of distant relatives, even the punchlines to her own signature party jokes. Alone in her study, Catherine sometimes caught herself staring at old family photographs. Sarah and Emily laughing on the garden swing as children, Richard reading bedtime stories, the four of them locked in a tableau of happiness she no longer understood. Richard, always the quiet pillar, became even more withdrawn. His hospital shifts grew longer, or perhaps he simply chose to stay away from a house that felt emptier by the day. In rare moments when he and Catherine were alone, they clung to the familiar routines, shared coffee after dawn, the comfort of silent companionship. But something essential had frayed between them, worn thin by years of unspoken grief. Within the foundation, the sense of unease multiplied. Staff whispered about the missed deadlines, the increasing turnover, Emily's sudden mood swings. Even those who had championed her before now exchanged wary glances when her name surfaced. Files disappeared and reappeared with odd regularity. Numbers in project budgets no longer added up. Donors grew nervous, asking for regular updates, and a handful began to distance themselves from projects that once shone with promise. Meanwhile, Sierra, always perfectly poised, became an indispensable fixture in the organization. Her presence calmed jittery assistants and impressed the wary heads of committees. She listened more than she spoke, offered solutions that seemed both obvious and ingenious, and never pushed herself into the spotlight. When things threatened to unravel, a press inquiry, a missed deadline, Sierra would step in, quietly guiding matters to safer ground. To most, she was just the consultant everyone wished they had hired sooner. For Emily, Sierra became a paradox, both an anchor she relied on and a mirror she increasingly dreaded. In late afternoons, after most staff had gone home, Emily found herself watching Sierra from a distance. She admired Sierra's organization, her faultless follow-up, her ability to win people over with a warm smile. Sometimes, caught off guard, Emily sensed echoes of someone she once knew, maybe even loved. But as quickly as the feeling came, it was swept away by anxiety, by the uncanny sense that Sierra saw straight through her to the core of every doubt. Stress began to show. During a staff meeting, an offhand comment about missing grant paperwork pushed Emily over the edge. "If you all paid half as much attention to your jobs as you do to office gossip, we wouldn't be behind," she snapped, voice ringing across the boardroom. The silence that followed was heavy, shocked. Afterward, Sierra found Emily standing alone in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink, breathing in shallow, ragged bursts. "Rough day?" Sierra asked gently, her calm presence filling the cramped space. Emily managed a brittle laugh. "You can say that again. Everyone's watching, waiting for me to mess up. My own family." She trailed off, the weight of old wounds haunting her words. Sierra studied her for a moment, compassion flickering in her gaze. "Sometimes what cracks us open is also what frees us, you know?" Emily blinked, startled by the remark, unsure whether to find comfort or accusation in the words. "Thanks," she muttered, but the words felt small, weak. Outside the foundation's walls, the city's social scene buzzed with rumor. Longtime acquaintances traded knowing shrugs over wine, speculating about the Harrisons' bad luck or the family's inability to hold on to good staff. No one mentioned Sarah by name. Her exile so many years ago was a forbidden subject, but sometimes in the right circles, her memory surfaced as a ghostly caution. Richard, sensing the house's deepening gloom, attempted to reach out. One night, he found Catherine alone with a half-finished glass of wine. "Do you ever think about Sarah?" he asked quietly, his voice thick. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Every day," she confessed, voice trembling. "Sometimes I think I see her in a crowd, Sometimes I wish. But she couldn't finish the thought. Their pain hung between them like mist in early morning. Both wondered, silently, if their relentless chase for perfection had cost them the very thing they'd sought to protect. The cracks widened further when Sierra, preparing the foundation's next gala, arranged the seating plan with invisible precision. She placed herself at the table with Emily, Catherine, and several influential donors, men and women who had known the Harrisons since their earliest days in Connecticut. In the soft glow of chandeliers, as toasts were made and applause echoed, old family friends reminisced. "There was such promise in your girls, Catherine. I hope you know what a legacy you've built." Emily forced a smile. Catherine wiped at her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed. Through the thrum of conversation, Sierra watched, registering every falter, every glance layered with regret or envy. She waited for Emily's mask to slip, and for a moment, it did. Emily's hands shook as she fumbled with her napkin. Her voice failed her when called on for a speech. In that instant, Sierra knew. The wounds had never healed. They had only closed over, ready to rupture. Privately, Catherine began questioning the past in earnest. She sifted through old photographs and letters late into the night, piecing together memories, looking for the moment things had gone wrong. Was it her own pride? Her relentless will? Or had she failed her children in ways she was only now starting to comprehend? The foundation's staff, sensing a deep shift, started whispering a new question. What had happened to the family's missing daughter? The soft-hearted girl everyone once adored? As spring deepened outside the Harrison home, so too did the fractures within. The walls that had kept secrets for years were splitting, letting in light, and with it, the pain, the guilt, and the possibility that nothing and no one would ever be quite the same again. Somewhere, quietly and calmly, Sierra watched the Harrisons teeter on the edge of their reckoning, knowing that only the truth could mend what ambition, envy, and fear had broken. The mask comes off. The days leading to the next foundation board meeting unfolded as if under a gathering storm. Everyone felt it. Staff answered phones a little warily. Catherine flinched whenever Emily's name came up, and Emily herself paced the marble floors with growing agitation. Sierra, ever composed, was in the background orchestrating details, lining up allies, and waiting for the moment when all the subtle fractures she'd helped widen would become impossible to ignore. On the morning of the meeting, storm clouds literally rolled over downtown. Sierra arrived early, reviewing meticulous digital files one last time. She had evidence: old security camera logs, emails exchanged between Emily and the family housekeeper, and, most powerful of all, an original receipt quietly provided by a jeweler who'd appraised the heirloom necklace for insurance. Dated days after Sarah's exile, but signed not by Sarah, but by Emily. Sierra sent an encrypted version of the folder to the board chair and 2 senior staff, attaching only a note: "Review before this afternoon's discussion." As staff shuffled into the boardroom, the low hum of nervous conversation filled the air. Catherine wore an elegant sapphire dress, hands trembling as she clutched her purse, while Richard stayed at her side, withdrawn but visibly tense. Emily strode in last, designer clutch under her arm, face set in that perfect practice smile. A mask she'd worn all her life, but that now seemed carved out of fear and pride. Sierra watched her sister's every move, noting the tension in Emily's jaw, the forced warmth in her greeting as she faced her parents. Finally, Sierra herself took a seat, deliberately positioned between the foundation's legal counsel and an influential longtime donor. She allowed herself one deep breath. The meeting began in routine fashion: finance updates, event planning, grant approvals. But after less than half an hour, the chairwoman's voice interrupted. Before we continue, there are some troubling materials the board must address. I ask that all non-board staff step out except those directly involved. Her eyes flicked to Sierra, then to Emily. A chill swept through the room. Emily tried to object, but her protest died as screens lit up with the digital dossier. Dates, documents, footage snippets scrolling by in stark silence. For long minutes, there was only the sound of rustling papers and the faint hum of the projector. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth as the jewelry receipt appeared, her eyes darting desperately between Sierra and Emily. Emily's composure cracked, almost imperceptibly at first. Her fingers fidgeted, then clutched at her skirt. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice pitched too high. "Are we really dredging up ancient history over a missing necklace?" These files could have been fabricated. But evidence, careful, time-stamped, witnessed, spoke louder than accusation. Sierra remained silent, her face a mask of professional calm, though her heart thudded so wildly she feared it would give her away. She watched the shift in the room, the way old family friends leaned in, the mounting disbelief on Catherine's and Richard's faces. Not directed at Sierra now, but finally, painfully, at Emily. The board chair turned to Emily. "Emily," she said softly, "these documents suggest a different version of what happened. Would you like to clarify for everyone here?" Emily hesitated, mouth opening, closing, her mind scrambling for lifelines. Her power was slipping, and she could sense it in every sideways glance from across the table. I tried to fix things," she stammered. "It was a mistake. I was young." I panicked. Sarah was always so good, so loved. I didn't mean for everything to get so far out of control. At the sound of her real name, Sierra straightened, no longer hiding. The entire room seemed to contract as she stood and looked directly at her family. Her voice, though calm, carried through every corner. My name was Sarah Harrison, and I never stole from this family. For years, I was told I was a failure, a thief. My life was destroyed by a lie I didn't create, and you all chose to believe it. Today, I want the truth, and nothing more. No revenge. Just my name back." Catherine sobbed, raw, guttural, years' worth of doubt crashing into certainty. Richard stared at his eldest daughter, words beyond his reach. Emily, stripped of her mask, looked both younger and far older than she was, memories flickering behind her desperate eyes. "I was scared," she whispered. "Everything always came so easily to you, Sarah. Father was always proud of your kindness. I thought if I were rid of you, maybe I'd finally get to be enough." Sierra shook her head gently. "You always were enough. You just never believed it." Her words, for a moment, weren't edged in anger, but in the sadness of lost childhood trust. There was no sound but the heaving of Catherine's cries and the murmured discomfort of the rest of the board. The weight of the truth pressed down on everyone, their privilege and blindness laid bare in the harsh light of the evidence and confessions. The meeting adjourned amid stunned silence. Catherine clung to Sierra in the hallway, grief etched in every line of her face. "I am so sorry." "We should have listened, should have known." Richard managed only a nod, eyes rimmed red with silent shame. Even longtime family friends, many who had spread the original rumors, struggled to meet Sierra's gaze. Later, Emily found herself alone in the shadowed boardroom, her perfect world shattered and scattered. She ran her hands along the empty table, staring at faded family photos on the wall. herself and Sarah together as children, before the weight of jealousy or expectation had twisted them apart. For the first time, she understood the price of every small cruelty, every calculated remark, every moment when she'd chosen pride over love. Fresh tears streaked her face, tears not only of guilt, but of regret for the years lost and a relationship broken beyond easy mending. Sierra stood outside the building, rain tapping quietly on the awning above her. Her body shook, not from sadness, but from a heavy release. The burden of lies finally lifted. She could feel the stares of those inside, but she was beyond seeking their approval. Instead, she looked forward, breathing in the cleansing air and holding herself tall. The reckoning was not joyous, but necessary. Inside, the Harrisons' carefully built walls of perfection had truly cracked, the mask of respectability irrevocably removed. None of them could pretend anymore. In the aftermath, apologies were offered, but Sierra knew they could not rewind years of pain, not for her or for Emily. As dusk fell, Sierra walked toward a future still uncertain but wholly her own. For the first time, she felt not the castaway, but the architect of her story, a woman who had reclaimed her truth, no matter the cost. And within the raw silence the Harrisons were left with, the first and hardest step toward real healing could finally begin. Collapse and remorse. The Harrison home, once a paragon of order and achievement, seemed to collapse inwards the week following the boardroom reckoning. The air inside was thick with grief and the chill of irreversible loss, as if the house itself recoiled from the memories it contained. No one moved through its rooms as they once had. Laughter, music, and the rhythm of practiced perfection had given way to heavy silences and the echo of regret. Catherine retreated into herself. Days passed where she barely left her bedroom, moving through routines with mechanical precision but no sense of purpose. She stared for hours through the window at the garden she had once tended with such care. The roses bloomed, indifferent to human sorrow, but Catherine could only wonder how she had failed so catastrophically in tending to her own family. Her pride, so long her shield, became a source of agony. She replayed every slight and snapped command, all the moments when she had dismissed Sarah's innocent pleas or looked the other way as Emily's sharpness caused invisible wounds. Forgiveness for herself seemed impossible. Once, in the middle of the night, she searched frantically through Sarah's old things, clutching a faded sweater to her chest, overcome with a desperate ache to turn back time. Richard, too, carried a special torment. Always quiet, always the pillar. He now felt his foundations crumbling. For years, he'd buried himself in work and the comfort of certainty. Now, certainty was gone. He wondered if his silence, mistaken for wisdom, had actually spoken the loudest, telling Sarah she was alone, even as he convinced himself she knew of his love simply by his presence. He called the hospital and asked to take some time off, for the first time in his career, not out of need for rest, but an overwhelming need to think and mourn. One afternoon, he joined Catherine at the kitchen table. Tears moved quietly down her cheeks as she stared at a photo of their daughters. Sarah at age 12, eyes bright with trust, and Emily with her arm slung around her younger sister's shoulders. The photo was a lie now, and Richard understood that the hardest truths were those that buried themselves so deeply in the heart they could never be confessed except by fracture. "I always thought I was protecting everyone," Catherine whispered, voice hollow. "But I didn't see what was in front of me." "I chose what was easy to believe," Richard nodded, words failing him. Emily, meanwhile, was a shadow pacing through the ruins of her carefully constructed identity. The unraveling at the board meeting had stripped her bare. In public, she forced a smile in routine, but in private, she felt consumed by shame. Every task seemed insurmountable. She was constantly haunted by glimpses of Sarah's face, the echo of her sibling's voice, steady, wounded, yet not vengeful. Social media was merciless. News of the scandal, though not splashed across headlines, spread rapidly in the tight-knit world of local philanthropy. Invitations to sit on panels and boards evaporated overnight. Volunteers left the foundation in droves, unwilling to align themselves with a tainted legacy. In quiet spaces, Emily overheard old acquaintances discussing her. Disbelief, disappointment, faint disgust. One evening, unable to suppress her suffering, Emily tried to call Sarah, or Sierra, as the world now knew her. The number went straight to voicemail. She left no message. Instead, Emily sat on her bed and took inventory of her regrets. Every lie she nurtured, every moment she might have come clean, every cutting remark that won her a parent's approval at Sarah's expense. She felt, finally, the fullness of her wrongdoing. It filled her chest with an ache worse than loneliness. At the foundation office, the staff carried themselves with wary caution. The organization's board placed Emily on administrative leave, pending personal time for reflection. Projects were canceled, donations dried up, and key employees submitted their resignations. In the empty office after hours, Emily stood by the window and stared into the city lights, suddenly understanding what it meant to be truly alone. Catherine and Richard tried to reach out to Sarah, writing long letters, rehearsing apologies no sentence seemed strong enough to bear. There was no response, at least not right away. Sarah, now Sierra, let their words sit unopened at first, uncertain whether to trust the promises of remorse and the confessions of guilt. She had grown beyond their circle of influence, but forgiveness, she realized, was harder to grant than to long for. Each family member moved through the debris of their lives, discovering that regret was a slow-burning thing. Simple tasks brought reminders. Setting the dinner table for 3, Richard flipping through medical journals Sarah once loved, Catherine folding napkins Sarah had sewn for a forgotten birthday. Even Max, the family's aging golden retriever, wandered the halls with confused loneliness, sometimes curling on Sarah's old bed, as if waiting for her to return. One day, in the haze of late afternoon, Catherine summoned the courage to visit a local therapist. She spoke for hours, unraveling decades of guilt, pride, and expectation. "I thought love was discipline," she admitted. "I never realized how easy it is to confuse order for affection." The therapist urged grace, not just toward her daughter, but toward herself. It was the first time Catherine felt hope, however faint, that healing might still be possible. Richard, inspired by Catherine's effort, began meeting with an old friend, a retired priest. Together they walked the city's trails, discussing faith, redemption, and the unequal weight of human error. "You cannot force forgiveness," his friend advised gently. "But you can live in a way that honors your regret. Begin again, even if you are never welcomed fully back." For her part, Emily sought restitution. She stepped down from her position at the foundation, issued a public letter of apology, and dedicated herself to volunteering in small, unglamorous places: soup kitchens, literacy programs, animal shelters. Each day she worked alongside strangers, asking for nothing, speaking rarely of her past. In truth, She did not know if she deserved reconciliation, but she wanted, at last, to become someone her sister might one day permit into her life. Meanwhile, Sierra watched these changes from a careful distance. She read each letter, wept for the love that had once bound and now set her apart, and quietly rooted for their recovery, not as a child longing to re-enter the family, but as a grown woman with compassion enough to wish them peace. She understood that justice, in the end, was not punishment, but the clarity to move forward, unshackled by the weight of old chains. The Harrisons, so long defined by their pursuit of perfection, now moved gingerly along the long road of remorse. Every step was faltering, at times backward, yet undeniably toward the possibility of renewal. In their sifting of old wounds, they discovered that the collapse of the mask was not only an ending, but, perhaps, the first step toward something true. As the days shortened and the air grew crisp, the glow of reconciliation was still a distant hope. But remorse, once acknowledged and carried with humility, began to open cracks through which forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, a new kind of love, could eventually return. Forgiveness and new beginnings. The first signs of spring crept quietly through the Connecticut suburbs, as if testing whether the Harrisons' hearts were ready for new beginnings. Early crocuses pushed through frost-roughened soil. Robins stitched the morning with half-hopeful song. And inside each family member's world, the slow, painstaking thaw of forgiveness and the courage to try again unfolded in fits and starts. For weeks, Sarah, now fully Sierra, remained distant, her silence not vengeful but protective. She had read her parents' letters, listening for sincerity beneath the ritual apologies. She saw in their words a fragile yearning for her return, mixed with honest bewilderment at how to make amends. Sierra was not sure she believed in the possibility of reconciliation. Self-preservation had taught her to doubt grand gestures and to trust in the quiet, unseen work of healing. But forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single act, a signature on old wounds, a tearful reunion, but a constellation of small choices. It was the decision to answer a text from her father, cautious and brief. It was replying to Catherine's tentative invitation for coffee at a neutral cafe. Most of all, it was allowing herself to consider that her own future need not be forever defined by the pain her family had caused. Their first meeting, arranged nervously in the back corner of a local bakery, was colored by old memories and new uncertainties. Catherine arrived first, hands folded tightly around a chipped mug, eyes rimmed with the deep fatigue of regret. Sierra entered, dressed simply, her posture both guarded and open. Years of fending for herself etched plainly in the way she did not flinch, but also did not rush into her mother's arms. They spoke in halting, honest sentences. Catherine admitted to her failings, not as a flawless parent, but as a human being who had clung to the illusion of perfect order. "I see now how much I hurt you, and I can't make that disappear," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I want you to know I remember every kindness you ever gave." Sierra nodded, unsure what to say, and for a while, they both watched the steam curl above their cups. In that silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness in full, but a willingness to keep sharing space, to give the past a conversation rather than a verdict. Richard, for his part, approached reconciliation with careful humility. He sent Sierra passages from novels she'd loved as a teenager, simple notes that neither pressed nor pleaded. One evening, he called, and when Sierra picked up, he said only, "I hope life is gentler with you now. You always deserved better. I am sorry for my silence." For Sarah, These were the words she'd most longed to hear. Not ornate contrition, but the gentle affirmation that she had, at last, been seen. Emily's journey was the hardest and the most uncertain. For months following the foundation scandal, she moved in a kind of polite exile. Her public persona stripped raw, her ambition hollowed out. Therapy became a lifeline. There, she unearthed years of jealousy and insecurity, admitting how fiercely she had resented Sarah's genuineness, the effortless affection their parents once showed her younger sister. Eventually, Emily wrote an unflinching letter to Sierra, one that took many drafts and many nights of trembling hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I realize I was so afraid of not being enough that I made you smaller in our lives, just to feel bigger in mine. I'm sorry for every moment I stole from you. If you ever find it in yourself to let me back in, even just as a friend or a pen pal, I promise I will try, every day, to be better. For weeks, Sierra let the letter rest on her nightstand. When she finally replied, it was simple, but enough to begin. I'm not sure what our future looks like, but I'm willing to see who we can become now. Forgiveness in the Harrison family did not happen with a single outburst of joy. It came piecemeal, with awkward family dinners in restaurants, short walks in parks, updates exchanged by text, tentative invitations to public events where Sierra's business acumen became a point of new pride. They worked to rebuild trust without forcing it, taking time to understand that love after a disaster comes quietly, through consistency rather than promises alone. Sierra learned to appreciate her parents no longer as icons, but as complicated people with their own broken edges. She accepted Catherine's urge to overplan, now tempered by a fresh humility. She saw Richard's efforts to listen, to ask questions about her life outside the shadow of old disappointment. Emily, newly attentive and stripped of artifice, began to share bits of her own struggle. Therapy sessions, volunteer stories, her first steps into a life measured by sincerity, not approval. Family celebrations were smaller, but more honest. On Sierra's birthday, they gathered at her modest apartment for a simple dinner. There were no forced toasts, just laughter, inside jokes revived, and even the space to grieve what had been lost. At one point, Richard found himself tearing up at the sight of his daughters cooking together, with Emily gently asking Sierra about her favorite spices, and Sierra, for the first time in years, offering advice without fear. Outside the Harrison home, the community watched a quiet transformation. Catherine, once known for extravagant events, shifted her energy to supporting local causes that helped families and youth in crisis. Richard spoke at a medical conference about the importance of mental health and family support structures, ending his talk with a story about humility and the courage to change. Emily, no longer seeking status, became a fixture at the same animal shelter where Sierra once found solace. Most tellingly, Sierra no longer built her identity around loss or revenge. She devoted herself to growing her consultancy, mentoring others who had overcome hardship, and building friendships based on genuine respect. She let herself fall in love, with art, with city walks even, tentatively, with a gentle, kind man who admired her resilience and the grace she showed both to others and herself. Forgiveness remained a work in progress, a living thing requiring tending, patience, even periodic distance. There were still flashes of old pain, unsayable memories, days when the weight of all they'd endured sat heavily in the room. But slowly, the Harrisons learned to speak of those things openly, letting sunlight into rooms that had once only known secrets and shadows. By the time summer arrived, the family was not what it had once been, nor did they wish to be. They were quieter, more honest, anchored by the knowledge that the past could not be changed, only acknowledged and learned from. If perfection had once been their lodestar, Now it was acceptance of one another, of their wounds, and of the possibility that happiness could finally be built on truth. In this way, forgiveness in the Harrison story was neither neat nor complete. It was a garden left untended for too long, now slowly recovering, learning to bloom in new and unexpected ways. And for Sierra, strong, remade, and at last her own person, the knowledge that she could open the door to her family without erasing herself was the truest new beginning of all. Epilogue: Finding the Light Again. Years had passed since the reckoning that changed the trajectory of the Harrisons. Time, with its gentle relentlessness, had softened the sharpest edges of old wounds, but the scars, like veins of silver and stone, remained, marking not just pain, but also endurance. In the quiet suburbs, the house that once stood as a fortress of pride became, over time, a home rebuilt on gentler ground. Sun streamed through the big kitchen window, landing in warm squares across the table where Catherine sat, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She had grown older, yes, but there was a radiance to her now that had nothing to do with outward perfection. The garden beyond the glass was no longer manicured with military precision. Instead, wildflowers and herbs tumbled together in an exuberant sprawl, a testament to her acceptance that life, like a garden, flourishes best with room for imperfection. She spent mornings among the blooms, fingernails stained with earth, content to lose herself in the patient work of tending life. Some afternoons, she'd linger on the porch, greeting the neighbors who once regarded her with a mix of envy and distance. Now they stopped to chat, not about society galas or the latest achievement, but about weather, children, and the perfect tomato for summer salad. Vulnerability had made her approachable, and she was grateful for it. Inside, Richard moved with a new kind of ease. Retirement, once unthinkable, had been a leap, but he found purpose in simple pleasures: reading, fixing creaky chairs, volunteering at the local clinic. His calendar was no longer a fortress against feeling, but an open field, allowing time for coffee with old friends or walks with Max, the loyal golden retriever now going gray at the muzzle. He'd become a different kind of father and husband. In conversation, he listened more, asked about feelings instead of grades or accolades, accepted sorrow and laughter alike. Sometimes he and Catherine would sit together in the twilight, neither needing to fill the silence, grateful for the second chance to learn what love could be untethered from expectation. Emily, having endured her season of exile, charted a new course for herself, far from the spotlights she'd once craved. Therapy continued, a process of unraveling and sewing herself into someone real. She embraced humility, volunteering day after day at the animal shelter, her hands steady as she fed kittens or mopped floors. No one there cared about her past. Some afternoons, she led gentle writing workshops at the community center, guiding troubled teens toward stories of their own. She grew into herself quietly, and though the echo of her old ambitions sometimes lingered, it softened in the presence of honest work and true connection. Sierra, still Sarah in the private ledger of her heart, had crafted for herself a world that belonged entirely to her. Her business expanded steadily, but without the feverish urgency of proving herself. She mentored young women, especially those who had stumbled or been cast aside, urging them to believe in strength built from survival. Her apartment, once spare and transitory, blossomed into a home filled with books, plants, and art. Pieces she'd painted herself on drowsy Sunday afternoons. She had found joy in unexpected places. A Tuesday night book club, hiking alone in mountain silence, letters exchanged with a friend turned beloved partner who cherished her for her wit and courage, not family ties or former tragedies. Sierra's past no longer dictated the architecture of her days, though she carried its lessons everywhere. The Harrison family's reunions were rare but sincere. Birthdays were celebrated with potluck dinners, everyone bringing a dish, the old hierarchy of status happily abandoned. Laughter, tentative at first, then free, echoed through the kitchen. On some evenings, Sierra and Emily would take Max for a walk through the old neighborhood, speaking honestly about the years when envy and fear ruled them and the awkward, humbling way forgiveness had arrived. There were honest conversations about the past, not to wound afresh, but to understand. Catherine spoke of her regrets, the times she'd chosen appearances over her children's hearts. Richard apologized for his silences, promising simply to do better by those he loved. Emily admitted to her former manipulations, her jealousy, and her slow journey to forgive herself. And Sierra no longer needed revenge, nor did she shrink from memory. She recognized her own resilience, the power she'd grown in exile, the empathy that came from being forced to rebuild her world brick by brick. She neither erased her suffering nor let it define her future. One late summer afternoon, Sierra received an invitation from a local high school to speak at their graduation. She hesitated, then accepted, standing on the auditorium stage before rows of nervous, shining faces. She spoke not of success or the illusion of flawlessness, but about rising from pain, the courage to begin again, and the importance of kindness toward oneself and others. Many in the audience recognized her name. Some remembered the rumors, but all listened as she recounted how a life could fracture and, with work and time, be rebuilt stronger and gentler than before. Afterward, a student approached her, an anxious teen with eyes carefully guarded. "Do you ever really move past what happened to you?" he asked. Sierra thought for a long moment. "You carry it," she said finally. "But it doesn't have to weigh you down forever. You choose each day what to plant in the cracks left behind. Resentment or new hope. Sometimes both, but over time, you get to decide which one grows." She received thank you notes for weeks, some from students, others from parents or teachers who quietly admitted to hiding their own scars. Sierra realized, perhaps for the first time, that her story had become not a wound, but a ladder for others. As another autumn settled in, the Harrisons marked the new year not with a grand party, but a picnic in the backyard, beneath trees that had seen them through joy and heartbreak. Sierra brought homemade bread. Emily laughed as Max stole a sandwich. Catherine, her hair silver now, cupped her family's faces, one by one, just to say, softly, "I love you, just as you are." There were still gaps, birthdays that went missed, apologies that surfaced on slow walks or sleepless nights. But the family, once ruled by the brittle tyranny of perfection, had learned something rare and true, that love, tested and tested again, can survive if it's allowed to change. Forgiveness remained an ongoing act, never completed, but always begun anew. And hope, that most stubborn of lights, flickered bravely in every cracked and mended piece of the Harrisons' world. In the end, it was not the past that defined them, but the quiet, daily decision to reclaim the light, to meet each other honestly and themselves most of all as they moved into a future unpromised but entirely their own.